Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at a very, very interesting book. So this is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself. This is Harriet Jacobs, Harriet A. Jacobs. So that is the woman, that's who you see on the cover. It also contains a true tale of slavery by John S. Jacobs, that is her brother. And then it's edited with an introduction by Jean Fagan Yellin. And so this is a very, very interesting book. It contains a lot of introductions, a lot of verifications that this is in fact a true tale. This is not fiction, which is almost what people thought at the very beginning. When it came out in the 1863 here. To look at the book here. Yeah, so it came out in 1861. So it was published in Boston for the author. So it's a very, very interesting. It also contains a publication of her brother's story and a lot of documentation and maps and letters. And there's a whole appendix full of her letters to this Amy Post, who's trying to help her get this published. And it ends with her basically being free. So this is kind of an interesting tale. What's also kind of, and this is going to be hard to explain just because you read this like almost over 200 page novelization of her life. It's not a novelization, it is her life. So it's, how long is it? The total of her story is 259 pages. So that's not including the entire massive list of, yeah, all of this is just the beginning. This is just all the introductions. This is not the book. So the book starts here. And then it goes all the way to, let's see, where does it officially end? And you'll see the length of all the extra information here, from pictures to everything else. And let's get back away from her brother here, because you have his story as well. What are the appendixes? So this is the appendices. So that starts on page 261 and then ends minus the bibliography and the notes, through those of which there are dozens. This is very much a nonfiction biography. There's a lot of information here. All the way away from the notes. Notes. And more notes. Let's get back to the actual appendixes. Oh dear God, there are lots of notes on this thing. Back to all the letters and the information. Yeesh. Okay, there we go. So, this is literally the appendixes. This is all the extra information. The rest of this is the notes and the bibliography and more acknowledgments, of which there are dozens, and a giant index. So there's a lot of information in this book. And it's a lot of very, very interesting information. But in her life, so to speak, in her retelling of her life, Harriet refers to herself as Linda, and the family that's obsessed with her and technically that she escapes from as the Flints. I believe their name is Newcomb. And then she refers to her brother, whose real name is Jacob, as William. So it does get a little confusing after you read this huge story and you realize, oh, wait a minute, her name is Harriet, her brother's name is Jacob, because you get his novelization afterwards. So this is her life. And it goes through not her entire life. Obviously, she does not write this on her deathbed. She's very much alive when she does this. She writes it until she's free. So she's born, both her parents are black. Though I believe they're, trying to think, whether their mother or their father, I think, is mulatto. So they are paler skinned a little bit, both of them. So they're both on the lighter side of black. They are owned by an elderly woman and who treats them very well. I believe both of them know how to read and write. So and believes particularly her. She knows how. But she doesn't really understand she's a slave. She's a servant to this elderly woman who pretty much lets her play and gives her very simple tasks and treats her like a child that she is. But when she's about, I think, 7 or 8, her mother dies. And this is when, in her grandmother's home, she first hears herself refer to and her brother as slaves and how they are owned. So this is when she first becomes fully aware of what's going on. And then not too long thereafter, this elderly woman dies. And in her will, most of her slaves are to be sold. Linda, or Harriet, as is her real name, is willed to this woman's great niece. So this young girl, who I believe is younger than her. In this, she refers to them as Dr. Flint. Again, this is Newcomb is the real name, but again, Flint is what she uses throughout the narrative. And again, she also refers to herself as Linda throughout this narrative. So she's willed to them. Her brothers eventually bought them. Her grandmother, who was supposed to be freed, was sold, but thankfully she was bought by the widow's sister, who then freed her. So Harriet grows up. She's a house slave. Her brother works in the man's shop. I don't know if he's an actual doctor or he just has some weird PhD, but I don't know if he's ever referred to that he has a surgery. He's very much a businessman. So maybe he was a doctor at some point in time, but now he's a businessman. But again, she's a house slave and a servant, and she is not abused, but she witnesses it. So she's very much aware of what's going on. I think she tends to the young girl. Eventually, she has an affair with a white man. So I don't know if he does not rape her. She refers to him as her lover. So they have an affair. I think she's light enough skinned. He does not mistake her for a white woman. He does not want to marry her. She does not become his mistress. They have an affair. They have 2 kids, boy and girl. Her master also rapes her. Now, he rapes her. He forces himself on her. He is not entirely happy with the children because, again, the children are very pale-skinned. So they're light. In fact, I believe at one point in time, after they've escaped, her son is mistaken for white. So he is light enough. I don't know about her daughter. I think her daughter is pretty light-skinned as well. Now, after her children are born, her master starts to try to use them against her. She's very much aware she's a slave. She's very much aware she's owned. All illusions are gone. She's eventually sent to the plantation, where again, she's a house slave there. She sees how nasty his sons are. He would practically beat people to death. Eventually, she's sent back to the house in town and chooses to escape. She even pretends that she's going to comply, that she's going to do whatever the heck they want, and then runs away one night. And she spends 7 years hiding in a tiny hidey hole in her grandmother's house. For 7 years. So it's a long time. And she's within a couple of miles of her master. And he comes bouncing into the household periodically, screaming and yelling. Where the heck is she? No, of course, nobody reveals it. And at one point in time, shortly thereafter, she disappears. He's trying to find her. He has her brother and her 2 children arrested. Remember, her children are very, very young at the time. We're talking like her daughter's a toddler. And her son's not much older. So the kids are put in jail, as is her brother. Eventually, what ends up happening with them is they're convinced, a trader convinces Flint to sell them. And he already has a buyer, which is the children's biological father. So he eventually buys them. Now, again, the doctor sells them to the trader, trying to make sure they're sold somewhere else. The trader's like, you already made the deal, don't care. They bring the brother out in irons. That's described in his story. And eventually he's sold again to his sister's lover, as are the children, who are then sold to their great-grandmother. Kendra, be quiet. So the children are actually owned by Harriet's grandmother, which of course infuriates Flint. And the fact that, or Newcomb as his real name is, he also doesn't like the fact that the brother is now bought by this guy. This guy eventually runs for office, and I think for a wig. I can't remember whatever it is. He wins and marries and has a child of his own. So throughout this kind of time period where, of course, Harriet is hiding in a hidey hole in her grandmother's place, I think eventually he knows. Of course, he doesn't care. Nor is you find this out kind of later, how he doesn't really care about them. Eventually what he does is he takes William with him to kind of on a tour in DC, New York. The brother escapes. He's like, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm moving on. So he gets away. And essentially they acknowledge it, and it's like, fine. And I don't think he cares. I don't think the owner cares at all. He doesn't go hunting for him. He just doesn't care. And eventually what the guy does is he convinces the grandmother, and in fact realizing that Harriet is hiding, to send her daughter with him to DC, and he will get her with family in New York or New Jersey. I can't remember which one it is. And that eventually she'll be sent to school and taken care of. And so they agree to this. And there's some shady stuff that goes on later. So eventually, Harriet does escape. They realize she can't keep hiding any longer, and she's able to get away by a ship captain, who is, I think, her uncle-in-law. And he eventually vamooses as well, because he's forbidden to see his wife, and then he's like, you know what, I'm done. They'd had a bunch of kids. The tale of his wife, of Harriet aunt, is horrible. This proves how nasty this family is. So the mistress of the house that Harriet, of course, was owned by, forces her aunt to sleep outside the mistress's door most of her life. Even though she is married and she was originally supposed to be granted some sort of closet to sleep in, she has multiple miscarriages, a couple of stillbirths, until she gives up on trying to have children. It's like, yeah, she's just, because she's forced to sleep on the floor in front of this woman's door. Eventually the woman dies, and they're like, this is before Harriet leaves, and they're like, she was a great servant, she was a great friend. It's like, what the bloody? Yeah. And they tried to get her buried where she would be at the mistress's feet, and the family basically pays him to bury her with the rest of her bloody family. So, yeah. That's pretty much how deluded and nuts these people really are. Apparently the owner, Dr. Newcomb, would come back from New York when he was looking for Harry, because eventually he was convinced she's somewhere, and saying how the slaves are miserable and how they want to come back and they don't want to be free, and that they miss their masters, which of course is insane. Just completely insane. But that's how deluded and completely, utterly nuts this guy was. He really was crazy. Eventually, Harriet escapes by boat. She gets to, I think, Philadelphia. And then eventually the woman she's with is, she travels with another woman. They're hiding in the cabin. And this woman goes with a fugitive staff, gets helped by the fugitive slaves, basically, the organizations that helped them. Harriet eventually goes to New York, because that's where she's supposed to be near where her daughter's at. I think her daughter's in Manhattan. And she eventually goes to Brooklyn, meets up with her daughter and an old friend. The daughter's not well dressed. What the heck is going on? She doesn't seem to be all that educated. She doesn't seem like she's going to school. So eventually, Harriet goes to visit where her daughter is living, and the woman very much implies that the daughter is to be a servant and a good handmaid to her own daughter. And they do not treat her very, very well at all. And it very much frightens Harriet, the fact that she thought her daughter was free and safe and to be educated. And that's not really what's going on. She's almost continued to be implied that she's a slave and she's to remain a servant and a slave the rest of her life, which is not what Harriet wants, because Harriet, of course, is now in the North and she's free. So Harriet eventually starts working for this woman, taking care of her baby. But of course, the family that she escaped from come looking for her. She eventually reveals that she's a fugitive slave to her mistress, and she's like, fine, take the baby, go to the country. You can take care of the kid, which is very, very interesting. I could not imagine letting my child even go with a nanny, which of course we do not have, into the country. It just seems very, very weird, but of course it was the times. So Harriet goes into hiding with this baby to stay with family. He goes looking for her. Eventually they go away. She comes back. She, at one point in time, I think briefly, at some point in time, she actually goes to Boston, and that's where her brother's at. And her son eventually joins her there. So she's in Boston. She takes her daughter at one point in time with her, and she gets her daughter out of the house. This is when, I think at this point, what happens is the brother of the family that her daughter is staying with comes up, and he basically reports her and says, this is where this woman is at. This is who she's working for. She's your fugitive slave. This is what she looks like. And the brother is just kind of is irritating and very pro-slavery. So Harriet takes her daughter, and they go to Boston, and she never brings her daughter back. Eventually she sends her brother convinces her to send her daughter to boarding school. So up in upstate New York, then the Fugitive Slave Act is passed. And not too long after that, the mistress of the house that she's working for dies. So, and her former owners are obsessed. They keep hunting for her. You think they would give up. This is, of course, a couple of years later. Her son and her brother have run off to California because of the Fugitive Slave Act. After this woman, her mistress, had died, the husband convinces her to take the baby and go visit his family in England. So she goes to England with this kid, who she is bonded with. And she's there for a couple of years, and she finds no racism in the country in England. I think she's in Surrey. So she's there for a couple of years. And the family is still obsessed with trying to find her. She comes back with the kid, turns her back over to her father. They're gone for just a couple of years. Goes back and is working and realizes the family has sent letters to her. She's gone. I think she goes back to Boston. I think at this point, I don't know if she sent her daughter off to school or what before this, because some of this is getting muddled in my head. But she'd set her son up to be working, and I think she'd sent the daughter, I don't know whether she sent the daughter off or what, at this point. I think eventually the daughter goes to boarding school. And the son is set up in a trade. They think he's white, and when it's revealed he's white, they start abusing him. And so he leaves and joins a whaling ship. And I believe he eventually comes back. And I can't remember. She doesn't talk about her son quite so much afterwards, because they're pretty much free at this point, because the family's not going to go chasing after them. And the family who was kind of owning her daughter pretty much feels guilty for nearly getting them caught. And so, again, she's living with the Fugitive Slave Act, she's living under constant fear. So what she does end up doing is her brother tries to do a business up in upstate New York for a while. That doesn't work. He goes to California. I think at this point her son goes with him. This is when they go to California. She goes back to New York, and eventually the man that couple that she'd been working, obviously the woman has died, he's remarried and had another baby. And he invites her to work for him. And the woman is, of course, very similar to his first wife. She's very aristocratic, but she hates slavery. So this woman helps her out a lot. She takes care of the baby. This is when she also hides out the country with this woman's child. This is the half sibling of the little girl that she had bonded with and gone to England with. So she's very close to this family, and they trust her quite a bit. And eventually, this woman buys her. And I don't know if she buys her and the children. I think she just buys her, and she gets a written letter for her and the children that by this time the doctor himself has died, and it's the daughter and her husband. Her husband has nothing. The daughter, when her original master died, he had nothing. Again, he wasn't very rich in the first place. He lost a lot of stuff. He didn't really have anything. So the man her daughter was married to, he had gotten in a big fight with the family over something, and they had moved to Virginia. Kendra, I will let you out in a minute. Sorry, meowing cat. But they really didn't have anything. So eventually, this woman buys Harriet's freedom from the husband of her young mistress, who is now obviously an adult. And they've actually come to New York, and they have been hounding her like insanity. Like I said, this family is nuts. I mean, the man originally declares that his children will hunt her down for the rest of eternity. So it's like, he declares that my children will come hunting for you, even if I die. Yeah, they are nuts. And they try to coax her to come home, saying, your family misses you, you need to come back, we love you. And the reality is, of course, he's even admitted that he wants to make an example of her in the institution of slavery. So that is my child fussing. That is the end of this book. If you like what you see, be sure to check out the rest of the channel. This is cut short. Check out the rest of the channel. Leave a positive comment if you have one. Thank you.